Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Steve Vamos. Good evening to you and good morning from me, Steve.
Hey, good to see you, Julian. Thanks for having me.
Love talking to people all the way across the world in Australia. So you are an author, you're a speaker, you're an advisor, and you're also the former CEO of Xero, Microsoft Australia, and Apple Asia Pacific. So lots of leadership experience. And today we're going to be exploring change in the context of leadership, in context of people, and looking at almost that shifts and shocks that happen within organizations and how we manage that. Before we get into that, Steve, I'd like to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
I love having the opportunity to help people, particularly people who are in management roles, working in teams, working on change initiatives, um, really achieve greater success. I think teaching, coaching, whatever you want to call it, is a great way, in a sense, to make sense of my journey, but also to make sure that the experiences I've had and what I've learned, and the things that I really believe matter most, can be passed on to others and hopefully help them in their journey.
That's fantastic. And we're talking about sort of leadership and we're talking about change in that sort of context. And I'd like to get your perspective on the difference between sort of gradual shifts through to sudden shocks in organizational change and how we might sort of view them differently from a leader's point of view.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because the way that I look at it, shifts and shocks are both change situations. It's just that one might happen to be more intense than the other. So if you say shifts, I've seen many over the years in technology industry, from mini, from the mainframe to the mini PC, client server, the internet, software as a service. So that's been a gradual sequence of things now with AI. And so there's in a sense, a constancy of change that I think is really important to appreciate and reflect on in terms of our own ability to deal with change. And I kind of talked that today, in the world we live in, having change be one of your superpowers, if you want to call it that, is a really, really important thing, because we just don't know what's coming around the corner. But I also think that with shocks, it's really just that if you're good at change, then when you're hit with a shock, you will be able to get through that in a more conscious and a more measured way. So I think if you're clear about what the skills you need are in confronting change, then whether it's a shift or a shock, you'll be able to get through it better than you would otherwise. It's just that when it's a shock like COVID, or it can be something, when in New Zealand, when there was the attack on the mosque in Christchurch, that had a massive immediate effect on our people in New Zealand. You couldn't just ignore that. You had to, live through that change and that impact. And other little things, other big things like that require you just to really be at your best. And the best way to prepare is to be conscious about the things you need to do to best confront change.
And we talk about change is sort of here to stay, the old cliche sort of statement. But we know it's true, and as you say, those gradual shifts, and then there is that constant change. Your customers changing, your staff are changing, everything's changing around us constantly, isn't it? The market. How, as a leader, we don't get overwhelmed with that, because that could be quite overwhelming when you start thinking about change, thinking about all the things that happen. Even the small things can build up to something quite overwhelming, can't it?
Yeah, it is. And look, I think we all have had our moments, certainly over the last few years, of just feeling like there's just so much to absorb with what was going on through the pandemic, and actually, arguably, what I call uncovid, which is what's happened since, has been just another episode of ongoing challenge. I think it comes down to this idea of how can you be resilient through all of this. And my belief is that you're best, in a sense, and the most important thing is to try and process what it means and not let it just buzz around in your head as a bunch of issues, but to say, okay, this is what I'm facing. What am I going to do? What are the most important things? What do I need to focus on to get through this? And then what you do is you put your energy into the action you can take, the difference you can make in those moments, rather than letting yourself get buzzed around by everything going on. It's about breaking it down to what am I going to do next that I can control, that I can influence, and I'm going to let everything else kind of go. That's not easy to do, but even if you can get some measure of that, it's really helpful. And I've always found that as a human, you go through the kind of shock and the kind of frustration and that feeling of being a victim um, in most of these situations. But it's really about how you get to the other side by saying, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to focus on? And then putting your energy into that.
And I think it's okay to accept sometimes that we don't always get things right. Our emotions run away. And I think just that a sense of accepting, actually, it's okay. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to do. I think that's okay. Have you had any moments in your career where you felt not so much overwhelmed, but you had a lot of change going on and you thought, how do I navigate this? And what were the things that helped you at that moment sort of, I suppose, handle that emotional side, which is usually the emotional stuff that takes over us and causes us
Yeah.
to make those wrong decisions?
So look, probably just stepping back a bit, Julian, to answer that. I've got a very clear mental model that's grown up over the years that I really want to share, which is about the things that I think matter most when you're confronting these situations. And it really is, in some sense, about how you think, about what you do, and about what you say. And maybe just in response to that question, how you think is really, really important to be more conscious about. You know, we spend most of our working day in a mode of being on automatic, unconscious, because that's the way we work. Is if we had to reprocess everything all the time, we'd never get anything done. But what happens when you're in a situation of change is to recognize it. And then appreciate that the way of thinking for you to deal with that is really going to be different to dealing with, in a sense, our kind of human default position, or the way you want to be in things that are really known, process oriented, disciplined, that you want to just execute. So the way I look at it is we've traditionally been expected in our work environments to be in control or look like it, to not make mistakes, or we kind of hide them, and to know the answer to the questions we're asked, or shuffle around a bit. But that control oriented, mistake averse knowing is kind of comfortable for us because we feel safer. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with it for things you don't want to change. So, with a safety program or practice that you've implemented, that you've thought through, you've tested, you want people to adhere to that. And so being in that mindset is fine for things you don't want to change. But when you then move to a situation that's changing or moving, you've got to realize that your success lies not in control, but in caring, connecting, and enabling others. When the pandemic hit zero, all I could say to my people was do the best you can. And I worked really hard to learn from their experience and to support them and help them. With mistakes, getting to your question, you have to appreciate that in changing times, you're doing new things and different things. You will make mistakes. And by the way, it's always important to remember there's nothing we are good at today that we didn't get good at by making mistake after mistake till we got good at it. So you have to have a mindset that recognizes this is a changing situation. Mistakes will happen. We're going to learn from that. And that's the final piece. Instead of being a knower, you've got to open your mind to being a learner. So the mindset that you bring, the version of yourself you bring to a changing situation has to be one that is caring, connecting, enabling others, and willing to make mistakes and understand that they'll offer learning on the journey. So that then leads you to needing to be conscious of, as soon as your blood pressure's rising or you're feeling under stress or under tension, there's probably something changing around you. So stop, pause, and think, okay, the best version of me is not going to be, that kind of default controlling version. It's going to be the one that really appreciates this is not about me. It's about how I interact and help others.
That's an interesting perspective, isn't it? You've immediately gone from about you, and you've externalized it. You've almost And just by saying, you caring, connecting, and enabling, you're then engaging a team, aren't you? That you're engaging people around you, which is actually interesting. Actually, talk a bit more about that that approach of your caring, connecting, and enabling, and how that sort of manifests. And I don't know if you've got an example in your own sort of career history.
Yeah, look, it's there's been so many examples. So, in the dot-com crash, when I had 100 people in a room with me and we were in a startup environment with 9MSN, which was a joint venture between Microsoft and a big media company here in Australia called PBL. And I can remember being in the room with 100 people saying, well, the market's crashed. Everyone's now really negative about the future of online business. Where are we going to go from here? And I remember seeing these young people, because they were generally younger than me, looking at me going, so now what? And what I did was I acknowledged their fears, right? Their fears were, we might lose our jobs. What's going to happen? And, I've learned that, I genuinely cared about their concerns and their fears. I called it out. I said, I know you're worried about this, and I can't make you promises that everyone's going to keep their jobs, but I can tell you I'm going to do my very best to look after you. And by the way, that's an issue, that's real. I'm not going to ignore it. But let me tell you what we are going to do to get through this. And by the way, I need your help. And I've got any ideas and thoughts you have will be important too. So it's really the thing about all of this and the human element of change and how it is all about people is that I do this because it's good for me. I've learned this is good for me. Worrying about them serves me really, really well because they end up contributing so much more. It's this whole notion of, if you want to dish out tasks to your people, well, good on you. You're going to limit them to what you think the task is. If you look at your people and say, what's possible? How can you help me? What do you think we could do better? It's a really different environment you're creating, and it's a much, much better one.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you are feeling a bit, I don't know, whether you're feeling flat or not very excited about a situation, you start helping other people. You start worrying about yourself, and actually helping other people brings you some sense of purpose. It gives you energy. It does a lot more for you. So actually flipping your, as you say, you helping other people helps you, which is very bizarre, really. And actually, it's an interesting approach, isn't it, to have and thinking.
Well, it really is quite remarkable. I'm so pleased that there are people like you doing what you're doing, because the reality is this whole domain of creating great workplaces and spaces for people to experience at work, it's just a massively important thing to productivity, to the social fabric of our societies. It's about mental health. It's about, all these things come down to people being able to go to their workplace, feel that they're cared for, which means listened to, and able to contribute and have the founder of Xero, Rod Drury, I used to love the way that Rod talked about Xero being a place people could come to do the best work of their lives. And we didn't live up to that every day. We didn't, but it was an aspiration we had. And we can do so much good by improving the understanding and awareness that this is all about people. Technology doesn't innovate, people do. And it's really important to remember that. All this talk about technology, yeah, I get it. I like that. But let's talk 3 times about the human element versus the one time we talk about technology, because it is all about people.
And it's the people that are creating the technology. It's the people that are engaging. And I think it's not missing out the human side. I know when I was through COVID, a lot of leaders I was working with who were feeling a little bit like, I don't know what to do. And I go, well, talk to your team and say, I don't know what to do. It's okay to be, you don't have to know everything. And it takes actually quite a lot of courage and boldness to standing almost in the arena in the middle and go, I don't know what to do here. And as a team, let's help us navigate ourselves through this difficult time. And the leaders that did that actually worked really well, because then they got all those different perspectives, those insights. They got a team that started to contribute. They felt they were part of something, and actually having that sense of almost humility that you don't need to know all the answers. And I think that's the human side, isn't it?
It is. And look, this whole notion of vulnerability-based trust, which means that you build trust by being willing to share your fears, your failings, your struggles, and seek help. It's a really, I didn't start out in management with that, right? It was something that dropped along the way for me. I can remember being in a role. I wasn't, like it was probably in my 30s where I realized I don't need to know the answer. I just need to have people around me who do. So it is a really important thing. It just, I think it is such a foundational thing to be able to say, I don't know, can you help me? People just do. It's incredible. When you do say, I don't know, and I need help, people just jump into that void to help you. And, I think it's just, it's something that's really important to talk about and to encourage.
So we are experiencing change. Well, it feels like never before, but I'm sure every generation says that. I'm sure they do. So, but anyway, we're all experiencing a lot of change in many shapes and sizes. And I know organizations, the people can get almost a fatigue from that change, and it can be quite tiresome and exhausting. And so how as a leader do you keep people, motivated, engaged, and still quite excited about the journey you're going on, despite the constant change that it feels like, whether it's change that you've initiated or change that's been put upon you because of market dynamics?
Well, in a way, I think you have to take what change is giving you and make sure you land it in a sense, your strategy and your operating plan. So in other words, okay, this is what's going on. These are all the things we're worried about. Let's put them into our plan and decide what's most important. And then let's really have a conversation in our organization about how responding or initiating those changes lands on each level of our organization. And then doing that, which I call level order planning, and it's something I learned in my 40s, which is about aligning an organization around what's most important. It's scary. Alignment is not what I would call a broadly adopted consistent discipline. But you break it down. And what you do by doing that level by level is you confront the resource constraints and the overload that can happen. Because a lot of what happens in middle management, particularly, is they have all the stuff they've got to do every day. Plus, they get rained on all this stuff from the upper management. And upper management doesn't sit down with them and say, what's possible? What conflicts are you going to face here trying to do all this stuff? And I think that's a real failing of the planning process. You've got to be there because unless someone is willing, unless someone has done that work to say, to do the things you want me to do, I'll need more resource or I can't do it. And unless that conversation happens, what happens is these people end up with 10 things to do. They do 5 of them and you go, oh, okay, well, that was good enough because doing 10 was impossible. But you've created this anxiety because they're not delivering on what your expectations are. So I think it's prioritization, getting really clear about what's most important, and then making sure people understand how that impacts on their day-to-day, particularly middle management. The frozen middle is the fault of senior management. Let me tell you, when people are demeaning, leaders are demeaning of their middle management line, saying, oh, they're stifling progress. Well, that's their fault. It's not the middle management's fault. So really long-winded way of saying in those, you've just got to help people weed through what's most important. And I have on occasion said to people, I know you're worried about these things, but I don't want you to start worrying until I tell you to. So I will tell you when you need to start worrying about that. And particularly with things that we couldn't do much with. I'd say, look, you can worry all you like. It's not going to change it or fix it. So keep doing what you're doing and I'll let you know when I think we need to worry about that. I mean, I'm not sure that helped a lot, but it might have helped a little.
Well, it's that reassurance, isn't it? And it comes from your first point about the whole caring, and it's been genuinely interesting in other people's welfare and wellness and well-being, and thinking, actually, can I do something to help this situation that will help them be more efficient, more productive, but to reduce that anxiety? It's having and it goes back to the whole people and human side, having a caring attitude with people, isn't it?
Well, it does. There's a great saying. If you want people to think you care, you have to care. And it takes a moment to sink in. But the reality is, and look, I tell you what, one of my really um, convictions is that people management is a fundamentally important role in an organization, and that any people manager who's not good at it and trying to get good at it, or doesn't like it and doesn't want to be doing it, they shouldn't be in those jobs. Take them out, because people deserve to work for a manager who likes being a people manager,
Mm.
and even if they don't love it, is committed to being good at it and cares about their people. Because the opposite idea, and I'm having to talk about this, you go, well, is it okay to have managers who don't care about their people? Of course not. So again, it's good business. It's the reason I care about people is probably twofold. One is the influence of my parents, which is very strong around the respect for people, regardless of their standing and place in the world around me. But the other is it works. It works. You create great workplaces when you genuinely care about people. And if you don't care about people, then I don't know, why are you doing what you do? Do something that doesn't involve them.
Well, it makes organizations good, excellent. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the whole point of it. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of people we know get promoted because of their technical prowess, and rather than their ability to manage people and get involved with people. And there's a whole failing in organizations where you've got people in positions where they're very good at what they do in the context of specialism, but they're not very good at the whole people side, or got no interest. And I think the difference is, you can learn skills of managing people and get involved, but if you haven't got that attitude of wanting to care, look after, shape, develop, and bring people on, then you're gonna struggle with that.
Yeah.
In terms of, once you've had a shock in an organization, a big disruption, whether that's COVID, whether that's I don't know, loss of a big customer, whatever it may be, and there's been a significant change with that. How do we build sort of confidence back into the team? Because some people get really knocked by things like that and shaken, as we have done with the pandemic.
Yeah. Look, I think that probably the scenario that is the toughest there is when you have to let people go. A lot of these the actions by technology companies to reduce staff, and the whole process of announcing a downsize and then figuring out who goes, who stays, that can be brutal for an organisation. I think, and then again, the way to deal with that and lessen the impact of that is to genuinely care about the impact on people, and to make sure that you acknowledge management's role in what happened in causing that issue to occur. Even if it's an externally driven thing, which it often is, it's still something that the management team wasn't as well prepared for, because you never ever want to be letting people go in that way if you don't have to. So the main thing is to treat people with real respect on the way out. Like this idea that you tell them, one day and they're out the next day, I think is abhorrent. And companies still do it. I've never done it. I don't subscribe to it. My view is I trusted them yesterday and I announced that they're leaving today and have to have that conversation. I'm going to trust them till, the time they've had the opportunity to finish what they're doing and say farewell. That's so important to the people who stay behind.
Mm.
So again, it comes back to this caring about people, and they're resilient. People are resilient, really resilient, if they felt looked after and cared for, and they don't expect guarantees. So I think it kind of comes back to that previous theme. Otherwise, again, it's about trying to break down and simplify the complexity they're feeling and seeing, and break it
Mm.
into what are the priorities and how we're going to go tackle them.
And when you reflect back on your career, and you think perhaps in the early days, what sort of one thing that wish you'd known earlier than you know now?
Look, there's so many things that I now know that my book really is about 40 years of learning and experiences, and I'm very honest about where I made mistakes and where I observed others making mistakes. Um, I would probably say that is, funnily enough, the impact of people as being the priority focus really hit me in my early 40s when I was CEO of 9MSN, which was that digital business I mentioned before. I joined that company with no experience in advertising or digital media, or media, sorry, in media. I was a tech sales guy who became the CEO of a media company. And I knew nothing about it. Every meeting I went to in the first 2 years, and there were about 100 people in the business, I was the one in the room who knew least. And so all I could do was listen, learn, distill what I saw as the problems, and then use my authority as CEO to clear the path, to help those people fix the problems and get them out of the way. And I did that for 2.5 years. By 2.5 years, I started to get a bit dangerous with selling advertising, and I had a bit of an instinct for media, although still not at a very high level relative to others. And I was in my office, sitting there I was 2.5 years in, I'm sitting in my office. We became industry leader and stayed there until Google overtook us several years later. We had an amazing workplace. I had a reunion with a dozen of those people last night in Sydney, and they still feel, this is 25 years ago, they still feel connected. And it was a culture that was amazing. And I 100% put that down to the blessing I had of not knowing the domain. All I could do was care about enabling others. And so for me, Julian, the biggest lesson, the thing that I didn't appreciate, but I was taught to do because I was in a good school called IBM, which made me focus on being a good people manager. I didn't know so much why and what the significance was, but I did it because I was told to. That in my early 40s became an absolute obsession, conviction that the role of leaders is head coach, not star player. And I've gone head to head with CEOs of organizations with that argument ever since. So I'd say that's the most profound one.
Yeah, and it's interesting having that perspective of being the head coach rather than the star of the show, as it were. And it's not all about you. Actually, it's all about them. And I think that switch, when you get that right in organization, is so powerful. I say so enabling and empowering to the team. As we finish, is there one sort of thought or advice you'd give to leaders right now that are managing change and difficulties or disruptions? What would that be? And it could be something from within your book, what you've got sort of built in that.
And look, I would say it breaks down to three things: be conscious, find ways to slow the moment down, whether it's breathing, whether it's whatever, going for a walk, recognizing when you're really under pressure and you might react in a way that isn't the best version of yourself in change. I think that's be mindful and be conscious that the way you need to think when you're sort of reviewing the financial reports is different to the way you need to think when someone comes to you with a problem, a challenge, a change, or something happens externally. The second is do something every day to improve how your team is working together. We know why we're there, we know what we're doing, but it's the how that is the difference. Obsess about how. And the best way to do that is to ask the team the question: how do we rate how well we're performing relative to what's possible with what we have today? With the resources, with the money, with everything we have today, how do we rate our performance? Good teams will often only rate themselves 6 or 7 out of 10. And it's important. The question is with what we have today, not if we had more, because that then gets you focused on how are we going as a team right now with what we've got. And then when you say 6 or 7, you go, well, and by the way, 70% of people I've asked this question have never, ever in their lives worked on a team they rated better than 8. And that's sad and a little bit scary. But the point is, the next question is more important than the score. What's the one thing we're going to do to improve how we work together? And that's where the power is. I'll tell you, little fixes in that change a team's dynamic dramatically because they think you're the leader and they collectively care about doing it better. And the final one is all of that leads to difficult conversations. You've got to have them. You shouldn't avoid them because the difficult conversations are key to clarity. Clarity of purpose and priorities. It's clear to alignment, moving resources from one part of your organization to the other. So it's really important. Those three things: think about how you think, Think about, do what you do and do it better every day, how you do it
Mm,
better, and then have the difficult conversation would be, if you can if I can brand that into people's heads, and then once a day they think about how they're thinking, how
mm.
their team's working, and whether they're avoiding a conversation, I think that's a real pathway to dealing with change better.
And it's interesting. 2 out of 3 of those sort of points, we're all engaging with the team. It's all about the team and bringing in involve the team. Obviously, you've got to think about yourself and your own sort of conscious what's happening there, but actually, it's all about engaging the team. And I like the idea, almost like, how can we improve ourselves? It's that open question of let's all work together, and people love that, and that's how
Yeah.
you build teams.
And
Um,
you make the team the object, not a leader, and saying you're the problem, or an individual on the team, you're the problem. Now those things have to play out in their own way, but this is a safe way of having the conversation about the things we can do to be better, and it kind of leapfrogs some of the people issues in the short term to get a better outcome.
hmm. Excellent. That really appreciate that advice and all what you've shared on this podcast, Steve. Really helpful and insightful. If people want to sort of connect with you and get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah, LinkedIn. So Steve Vamos on LinkedIn. And also I have a website, so stevevamos.com. So
Fantastic. Well,
just my
thank you
name,
for your time
Steve
today.
Vamos. Hey, thanks for having me, Julian, and well done to you for what you're doing. It's really important work. Thank you.
Thank you.